Matthew chapter 5, and we'll do a little bit of, I like to do a little bit of contextual work each week just to get us back where we understand where we have been. Any passage being taught upon in the Scripture can be made to say almost anything you want it to say, unless you put it in context. I always like to say any text without a context will actually be a pretext for things. So we don't want to do that. So I always try to work a little bit in a recap. So remember that the Sermon on the Mount is a corrective discourse. You remember that the apostles, the disciples that are following Jesus, believe that they're going to rule and inherit a political kingdom. We looked at that especially very early in our original work in Matthew, that the way that Matthew actually lays out chapter 1 is really important because he refers to David and he refers to Abraham and then he refers to the Babylonian captivity. Those are the three things in Matthew chapter 1 where Jesus actually, or where Matthew is writing to the Jewish people. And the reason that he mentions David, Abraham, and the Babylonian captivity is because to Abraham is promised the entire world. He's promised there's going to be a time where he's going to be a blessing to the entire world. And the entire world, whoever curses him will be cursed, and whoever blesses him will be blessed. And so the way the Jewish mind understood this was, well, how did the Romans bless the entire world? The Romans blessed the entire world by ruling it. In other words, whoever would place themselves under Abraham's rule, Abraham's people's rule, would be blessed, and whoever did not would be cursed. So they saw it, they understood Abraham to be promised a physical land and a political kingdom that would expand its rule. Also, too, when you look at David, David is also promised a son that would rule over the whole earth forever and ever. They didn't understand one son to come and rule forever and ever. They understood one son that would come and set up a perpetual worldwide dynasty. Okay, they're looking for a perpetual worldwide dynasty, father to son that would rule the world. And then when you remember back, why did they mark the Babylonian captivity? Why would Matthew be concerned with their captivity to Babylon and dating it forward? Well, that's because they had Daniel 9 just like we have Daniel 9. They read Daniel 9. They could do the math that 77s turned to 490 years. They could calculate, they had abacuses. They could count the math, and they realized that the time of the coming of this dynastic ruler that would issue a worldwide reign was at hand. So they're looking for the Messiah. That's the one thing in Jesus' lifetime. They're looking. So it's not just that look, there were a lot of people that could have, quote unquote, fit some of the prophecies. He had to be of Judah, right? So it was plenty of people that were of Judah. He had to be one of Abraham's sons. All right, so anybody of the tribe of Judah that was of the kingly line could have fulfilled many of the prophecies. But that's not all. It had to come. He had to be here at the right time. And Galatians will make mention to it. Galatians and Paul will write, Jesus came at the right time. So that's what you're looking at. You're looking at the idea that the Jews and the apostles, the disciples who were Jewish, believed they were going to inhabit a political kingdom, a physical political kingdom. Now, and they set out from Capernaum at the end of Matthew 4 on a parade. And they believe they're beginning to inhabit this political kingdom. They're on their way to Jerusalem. They're on their way to rule. They're going to knock the Romans out. They're going to be the next dynasty, and that dynasty is going to be permanent. And so Jesus takes them aside in the Sermon on the Mount, and he begins correcting their ideas of what it's going to mean to be part of his kingdom. Like, blessed are the poor in spirit. And that's not a blessing they were looking for, And even in our world, even in our time, if somebody said, it's really blessed for you to act like a poor person, you will never learn that in corporate America. That's not what corporate America is going to tell you. In our world, might makes right. The strong survive. The smart dominate. Those with wealth get to act like they have wealth. So, and when you look around most of the American complex, but we didn't really originate these things. This has been the way it has been in every empire, in every strong nation. We confuse the blessings of God with wealth, and the blessings of God with power. And it's just, you can't do it. And that's just then Jesus takes him aside and says, look, you got this all wrong. It's not blessed are the wealthy, it's blessed are the poor in spirit. Blessed are the meek, right? Well, I thought the powerful were blessed. No. It's the meek who are blessed. Blessed are those who are continually happy. No. It's blessed are those who mourn. All right, so each one of these counteracts an understanding that the disciples have about the current political kingdom that they think they're going to inherit. And so then you come to in Matthew 5, and you come to verse 20, and verse 20 is sort of the passage that interprets much of the rest of Matthew 5 for us, for where he says, "For I tell you, unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven." And then he begins a series of, "You have heard that it was said of old." Right? That's the very next verse, 21. "You have heard that it was said of those of old, you shall not murder." And we saw that murder was a big idea. It was a big concept, because we've been really focusing on Psalm 119:96, which says, "I have seen a limit to all perfection, but your commandment is exceedingly broad." The commands of God are broader. It's not that I just don't kill you. Right? I can go through life and not kill you and still really not have obeyed the commandment. I was supposed to protect you. I was supposed to encourage you and encourage your life. I was supposed to do everything that I could to make your life worthwhile and satisfying and full. I'm to encourage life and to protect life, not just to not kill people. That's not the command, just to not kill people. And that's what he says. "You have heard that it was said of old, you shall not murder. But I say to you, everyone who is angry with his brother will be liable to judgment. Whoever insults his brother will be liable to the council. Whoever says, 'you fool,' will be liable to hellfire." And what's he doing? He's saying, look, you need to start at the very beginning. Where does murder really start? It really starts in the heart. It really starts at the moment, that flash moment of anger. And so you need to deal with anger. We need to deal with condemnation. We need to deal with insulting people. We need to do everything we can to keep ourselves from coming to the point where our hands reach out to take another's life. So we're to protect and we're to encourage life. And then you see next where he says, "You have heard of old that it was said," or you have heard that it was said, "You shall not commit adultery." Again, we learn the command of God is exceedingly broad. It is to protect and to encourage your neighbor's marriage. And also, too, this is such a serious thing to Jesus that you're supposed to cut your hand off or pluck your eye out before you go against this. This is so sacred to God. This is so important to God that Jesus will use. You need to use spiritual violence against yourself rather than do this. This is one of the most dangerous things. In one hand, you can do. In murder, you can destroy a person's life. In adultery, you can destroy generations of life. And and we looked at Malachi 2. We looked at the effect that divorce and remarriage, and really we looked at unlawful divorce out of Malachi chapter 2, and we saw that it propagated violence. It covered their garment with violence. And so that violence is actually increased. So we're supposed to take that super seriously. What we are to do is to protect and encourage your neighbor's marriage. We're supposed to do physical violence against ourselves, spiritual violence against ourselves, to protect their marriage. You're supposed to cut off our hand, pluck out our eye. We're supposed to be unreasonable with the flesh in this matter. We cannot reason with ourselves. And I don't know if you've ever done this or not, but I'll make a candid admission about some things. Have you ever? Okay, let's make it a rhetorical question. Have you ever reasoned with yourself? You don't have to nod your head. I mean sin. Well, I'll just do this one time. Or, I'll just do this one more time. Or maybe, God, I put these sins down, but this one, I'll work on that one. But for now, I'm just gonna work on these sins. I've got these under control. So God, it's okay if I do this one. You see how that's being reasonable? You see how you're trying to reason with yourself, reason with God? Really, it's just excusing a lot of actions. It's not reasonable to lay your hand across the board and take an axe or a hatchet or a machete or something and cut your arm off. It's an unreasonable action. There's no reasoning with it. You cannot reason with the flesh. You'll find yourself in very dangerous situations. I've seen people reason their way into divorces. I've seen people reason their way into financial ruin. I've seen people reason their way into those things by doing this behind the scenes with God in their life. And before long, they've reasoned themselves almost completely out of the kingdom of God. They are out. This is how people end up in dire straits when it comes to the body of Christ. You cannot be reasonable. This matter is not a matter you can be reasonable with your flesh about. We are to protect marriage. We are to protect our neighbor's marriage. And we are to do spiritual violence on ourselves. Divorce is not original to creation. We talked about this a few weeks ago. It is an orderly way to deal with the enormous and complicated problem of original sin. We just talked about in the Children's Catechism, original sin, and the problem of the complexity of humanity. As Christians, we were always to seek peace and innocence. We were always to be the innocent party in a matter of divorce. That divorce is never something that Christians actually have the option to pursue. We looked at Paul's application of that in 1 Corinthians chapter 7, I think. And the way Paul applies it, the Christian was always to be an innocent party. Then that pulls us up to last week, where we looked at oaths and vows are permanent words, and they're meant to make permanent things. They should be used sparingly, and they usually will be used to establish peace and innocence as well. In other words, let's use a court of law, for instance. You're a witness to a crime. They call you up there, and what you're saying is, look, I'm telling the truth. I'm innocent of a lie. That person is guilty. It is establishing your innocence, and it is also establishing peace in your society and in your community. Same way with marriage, right? Same with marriage is when you marry, you are declaring your actual intentions before all witnesses to keep your vow, your lifelong vow to your spouse before God and before these witnesses. You're establishing peace in the community because you're saying she's mine, he's mine. We are together now. This is one. Everybody else is off limits. For me, for her, the whole community. So you're establishing peace and innocence in that way. So that we see that oaths and vows, that divorce, that marriage, and that life, all these matters go to peace and innocence. Every one of them goes to those two words. And those are going to be important words because they're connectors to the next two sections as well. Jesus is not about to go to a different subject. This is very tempting for us in the Sermon on the Mount to think that Jesus is wandering around hitting just various topics as they pop into his head. I don't know, I've mentioned this several times, that sometimes we read the Sermon on the Mount like Proverbs. Don't do this with your tongue. Do this with your work ethic. Honor your father and your mother by listening to their words. Don't pursue the strange woman, etc., etc. And you'll go through a proverb and there'll be different, it's almost like different teachings. And in Proverbs, it's like that. In Proverbs, there's like a section, and another section, and another section. So we come to the Sermon on the Mount, we're tempted to read it like the proverb, but it's really not like the proverb. It's not like the proverb at all. Jesus is not wandering into a new area when we look at the next passage. It's connected in the same way that you look and you see, okay, their righteousness, or Jesus teaching our righteousness, is to exceed the righteousness of the scribes and Pharisees. So he starts with life, 6th command, adultery, 7th command. But with adultery leads him to the next two sections, which are divorce and oaths. Now these are going to lead to another section, another discussion. And this will have a lot to do with the papers that I have out over here that are like the concentric circles. So you'll see those in a moment. Let's go ahead and look at our next passage. Our next passage is going to be, I think it's verse 38. It's going to be verse 38 of 42. But Jesus is moving. I'm sorry, I left my paper over here. I got one out. Jesus is moving in a very, the way he uses this is very interesting. So if you have one of these pieces of paper here, you can see that when he starts with life, he starts with the individual, right? He starts with, look, I can't kill you, you can't kill me. And there has to be, in order for us to all live together, like I'm pretty sure today, none of you would have come to my house if there was the hint at all in any way that you would die while you were here. I mean, this sounds pretty simple, okay? I know, and it sounds like how does that connect? But no one shows up to my house. No one shows up to my house if there is, for the moment your thought enters your mind, somebody's going to kill me when I get there. This is the basis. This is the basis for living together. Look, I don't live in this house, in this part of town, if I think the neighbor next door, if there's a good chance or even any chance that one of my children is going to be killed. Or that I'm going to be killed, or some harm is going to come to us. It might, but when I look to move into a community, or when I look to live in a community, what am I looking for? In general, there's a reason why you live in a neighborhood you live in and you don't live in other parts of town. Safety. Now that can be, God can call you to a difficult situation. He might call you as a missionary into some parts of town, and we need to be open to those types of things. But one thing you need to see about life is that the first thing that we all have to have in order for us really to have community is we have to have the ability to be safe with one another. And that's the devastation of war. Devastation of war when you look at, go back and look at pictures of, say, World War II of Europe and the devastation. No one wanted to move there. No one wants to live in that. Life is the basis. Like, safety and life is the basis for community. It's the very first thing. You and I are not going to be friends if you think I'm going to harm you, or if I think you're going to harm me. Before we can move forward at all together, we must first give each other the blessing of life and safety and peace. That's what we're saying. And so then he moves outward from the individual. He moves to the next step. The next step in a society is then marriage and family. He moves into adultery and marriage and divorce and oaths. Why does he do that? Because those things are to be held sacred. Just as life is to be held sacred, so marriage is to be held sacred. That's the second ring. Sexuality is to be guarded because the breakdown of the family leads to increased violence, right? It leads to less safety. It leads to less peace. So that divorce and what God will call breaking covenant with your first wife makes for less peace. So sexuality has to be guarded. The breakdown of family, it increases violence and covenantal failure. The right understanding and practice of marriage, divorce, and oaths and vows are all essential elements of Christian community. And I mean Christian community like right here. But it can also apply to societal peace, to societal innocence. These things are the first two basic building blocks. The blessing and the gift of life, and the blessing and the gift of your family and protection of your family. Like, we should hold those things sacred. We have to hold those things first sacred before we can go any further. But look, Jesus is going to now expand, and he's going to go to the next ring out. And he's going to go to now your neighbor, okay? And I don't have the next word up there because I was going to surprise you next week, right? But let me give just a, what do you call it when you tell somebody what you're going to do ahead of time? I forget. Spoiler, right? Spoiler alert. The word that will be over the outside ring will be enemy or stranger. You see how he works from the individual to the family. Now he's going to work to society. Next week will be enemy or stranger. And so Jesus has been working his way out. By the way, the law of God also works its way out. Works its way outward. Primarily to do with your relationship with God. It works out concentrically that way. And then now when it comes to people, the law of God works its way out concentrically again. So, now Jesus will move into the next sphere. Let's go ahead and pick up, and we're going to read Matthew 5, 38 through 42. You have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you, do not resist the one who is evil. But if anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to him the other also. And if anyone would sue you and take your tunic, let him have your cloak as well. And if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with him 2 miles. Give to the one who begs from you, and do not refuse the one who would borrow from you. I remember when I first became a Christian, I was living with my grandmother. My grandfather had just died. And he had a wheelbarrow. And somebody in the neighborhood needed to borrow a wheelbarrow. And so he came to our house, and my grandmother wasn't home, and I gave the guy the wheelbarrow. Now, it puts us in context. My grandfather just died, so this is one of those things that's attached to him. You know, he used this wheelbarrow. And I loaned this wheelbarrow to the guy down the street. And my grandmother was like, you can't loan a wheelbarrow out. And I said, well, why not? And she said, well, you just can't. And I thought, well, the Bible tells me to lend to those who would borrow from me and not to turn them away. She didn't have any answer for that. So she turned back around and went in the house really mad at me. And I tell you, this passage, you can read it. And at first glance, if it did not smack you in the face, it should smack you in the face, because this is one of the harder passages. I mean, this is, there's like those passages in the Bible that are easy. The ones that call you to like lay down, like give your life or something. You can imagine yourself a martyr, right? I think everybody goes through this time period where we can imagine ourselves giving our lives for Jesus Christ, that we can do the big thing. But like this goes to everything. This goes to the heart. This makes life very difficult. This passage can make life very, very difficult for us. It's one thing to give our lives in like this moment of glory where we're the hero, and a whole other thing to be slapped and not respond in violence. Or to have someone sue me and for $10 and then read these words and have to give them 15 or 20. Or to have someone take my only shirt, and then when all I got is my jacket, they take my only jacket, and then once they have my jacket, and it's going to be cold that night, I got to take my shirt off. I'm giving the shirt too. I mean, this is a very difficult passage. It is super difficult for us to understand. And I think the first key for us to understand then is we need to go back to the Old Testament, and we need to look at the passage. Actually, Jesus is referring to passages. We need to look at the passages that Jesus quotes when he says in verse 38, you have heard that it was said of old, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. So let's do that. Let's go all the way back. The first one we're going to look at is in the book of Exodus. We're going to look at them sort of in order. So there's a passage in Exodus, a passage in Leviticus, and a passage in Deuteronomy. We're going to be in Exodus 21. Exodus 21. And this will be 22 through 25 is where Jesus is quoting. When men strive together and hit a pregnant woman so that her children come out, but there is no harm, the one who hit her shall surely be fined, as the woman's husband shall impose on him, and he shall pay as the judge determines, or as the judges determine. But if there is harm, then you shall pay life for life, an eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, burn for burn, wound for wound, stripe for stripe. All right? Okay, the next passage is Leviticus 24. Leviticus 24, and we're going to read verses 17 through 20. Whoever takes a human life, murder, whoever takes a human life shall surely be put to death. Whoever takes an animal's life shall make it good. In other words, you kill somebody's ox, you go to your house, get your ox, and trot it on over there, or you buy them an ox of equal value, basically. An animal's life shall make it good. Life for life. If anyone injures his neighbor, as he has had it done to him, as he has done it, so shall it be done to him. Fracture for fracture, eye for eye, tooth for tooth. Whatever injury he has given a person shall be given to him. Deuteronomy 19, 15 through 21 now. We're going to read that one. Deuteronomy 19, 15 through 21. A single witness shall not suffice against a person for any crime or for any wrong in connection with any offense that he has committed. Only on the evidence of 2 witnesses or of 3 witnesses shall a charge be established. By the way, before we get our grand jury process, by the way, just in case anybody's ever wondering how we ever came up with the grand jury to see if somebody should be indicted, they had to have like reasonable evidence. Okay, that's where it comes from. It comes from this passage. You have to have 2 witnesses or 3 witnesses to establish not whether or not they're guilty or not, but just to see whether or not they should even be charged with that crime. All right? Verse 16, if a malicious witness arises to accuse a person of wrongdoing, then both parties to the dispute shall appear before the Lord, before the priests and the judges who are in office in those days. The judges shall inquire diligently, and if the witness is a false witness and has accused his brother falsely, then you shall do to him as he had meant to do to his brother. So you shall purge the evil from your midst. And the rest shall hear and fear, and never again commit any such evil among you. Your eye shall not pity. It shall be life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot. Now, key is, do you notice anything that strings all those passages together? It may not readily be apparent to you because it's important for us to make some distinctions in the way we think about life. Every one of the passages we just read and that Jesus quoted has to do with either civil law or criminal law. In other words, you're getting in a fight with your friend, you push him, it hits his pregnant wife. His pregnant wife has a child. If the child is okay, you have to pay a fine. So this is a restitutionary fine. You have to pay a fine. If the child dies, you sacrifice your life. Eye for eye, tooth for tooth. It is a civil or a criminal law. They're not meant to be applied by the individual. In other words, let me give this for an example. All right? Brian and I are having a physical fight. Rachel's not been born yet. Joy's pregnant with Rachel. I shove Brian. He bumps into his wife. She has Rachel. Rachel dies. Sorry, Rachel. Rachel dies. Okay, Brian doesn't do this. Brian doesn't get to go, look what you made me do. Shoot. Boom. And end it right there. I would be charged. That's not for Brian to do. These matters have to do with civil and criminal law. This helps us to root out the problem that Jesus is actually dealing with here in the life of the Jewish people. We have to understand that they had a very specific, even in the last passage we read out of Deuteronomy, you see there were elders involved, there were court officials involved, there were charges being brought. This is the way official charges were brought forth, okay? So what we're looking at is we're seeing people in Jesus' day, what they had done was they had become a society of justice. That sounds really good, to be a society of justice. However, I'm gonna have to parse some words here, and y'all give me a few minutes, okay? And before you go, yeah, I agree, or no, I don't agree, or whatever it is. Before you do that, give me a few minutes to unpack this. You do want a society of justice. But you don't want a society filled with people seeking justice. That's what you don't want. Actually, you live in a society where everybody's seeking justice right now. That's why we're all so happy, and that's why everybody is so loath to do anything and everything's hands off, because we live in a society where everybody thinks everything has to be just and everybody pursues justice. And Jesus is dealing with this very thing because it's not original to us. It's original to them. They looked at their law and he said, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, wound for wound. And then after that, they tried to apply that to everything personally. Oh, look at my neighbor, he's doing this. That's not fair. That's not just. I need to go get some restitution for that. Or we're going to have a serious disagreement or argument. That guy is not a good guy. I'm not having anything to do with that guy. He did something unjust to me. Look, you're all unjust. We're all unjust. The world is unjust. Everybody's going to do something unjust. That cannot be the base. Justice cannot be the basis for our relationships. It cannot be. It cannot be because you're sinners, because we're sinners. But see, this helps us deal with the problem that Jesus is really dealing with. He's dealing with the Jewish culture of his days' inability to make an extremely important distinction. One that we need to really look at again and learn to make in our own society. That is, that in matters of state, in matters of civil government, or matters of the state, or matters of, I'll just use government, justice should be the pursuit. In the malicious act of murder, the murderer forfeits his life, right? Whether the unborn child is in Exodus 21, or born persons in Leviticus 24, or the attempt by the malicious witness to get the state to do his dirty work for him. See, he wants his neighbor's farm, right? And it's just easier for him to accuse him of a crime and then let the whole village stone him. Then he can just buy up his farm for pretty cheap, or take over the land more easily. You see, that malicious witness had an ulterior motive, and he was trying to use the state to get what he wanted, to punish his neighbor, to get the justice he thought he should get, because they probably had some type of disagreement in some other area. But in matters of state, justice should be the pursuit. And it's okay to have justice be the pursuit. But the society at large is not to pursue justice to the society at large. The individual should be pursuing mercy. Mercy belongs to the individual or to the family. As individual members of family, we're to pursue innocence, we're to pursue peace as much as lies within us. Vengeance is not ours. You cannot live a life that pursues tit for tat, insult for insult, blow for blow. That's not what individuals are called to do. The state does have an interest in justice. Helen and I should be treated exactly the same before a court of law. Exactly the same. Look, most of the principles that you grew up with and understanding of the American justice system came from the Bible. Equal before the law, right? The law applies the same to everyone. Those are biblical concepts. That's what justice truly is. We should be treated exactly the same before the law. The law doesn't come and look at me as male, look at her as female, or look at me as something else. It looks at us both equally. That's why on our courts, you used to have the idea, the justice was a blind lady with scales in her hand, right? She was blindfolded. She didn't know who was in front of her. And she didn't know what was in the scales. You put things in the scales, and the scales tipped whichever way they were going to tip. She didn't have anything to do with it. That concept of justice is absolutely rooted in the Scriptures. Absolutely. And we base our understanding of the law on building a civil society on that type of justice. But mercy is for individuals, not justice. Justice is for the state. Justice is for government. Justice is for other people to decide. It's not for you. You're not to return violence for violence. You're not to return adultery for adultery. You're not to return lie for lie. That's the kind of stuff you find in high school. Look back to high school. That guy hit me. I'll show him. I'll show him how tough I am. Oh, my girlfriend had cheated on me. Well, that's okay. I won't break up with her or let her know that I know. I'll just cheat on her back. See, that's the kind of childish nonsense that goes on when you're 14 or 15 years old. But unfortunately, many adults think this way. They just learn how to mask it. They just learn how to do it in such a way that it seems harmless. But you can't live your life violence for violence, adultery for adultery, and lie for lie. Imagine a place where this type of law of the jungle mentality is allowed to play itself out. You can probably think of several small countries in North Africa, for instance, where this type of law, where the strong carry these things out, where vengeance is carried out by individuals. But we can't live that way. We're not called to live that way. That's not a wise biblical life. We are to pursue innocence and peace to our death. That's a strong phrase, but we're to pursue innocence and peace to our death. You think about the first 8 persecutions by the Roman Empire. The only thing Christians wouldn't do was say Kaiser e Kyrie. We wouldn't say Caesar is Lord. And they hung us in nets and they sawed us in half and they fed us to lions and they killed us. And we never took up arms against them. We never formed a quote-unquote Christian army. We never returned violence for violence. That's not what we did. We laid down our lives. When they slapped us on the cheek, we turned to them the other also. We gave to them what they did not deserve. Vengeance is the Lord's. He will repay wrongs that are done. But I want to ask a serious question today, and that is this. How does the Lord repay wrongs? Because this is the misunderstanding that the Jews have, and I think the modern, actually Christian American has as well. Because how does the Lord repay wrongs? That's going to be an interesting question. Because we have the assumption that when it says, vengeance is mine, I will repay, that God's actually talking about, the last thing where He sets up a throne and He judges people. But that's not actually, I think, the right way to interpret that passage. Well, why would you say that, Jeremy? Well, it's interesting that you asked me that. I know y'all all just asked that question. Why would I say that? Go ahead and turn to Romans in chapter 12. Keep in mind now, as we go there, that justice belongs to the state and mercy belongs to the individual. And you're going to see the Apostle Paul, I think, flesh out the passage that we're reading in a practical way. I think we'll be in verse 14, yeah. And for the record, I absolutely hate the chapter headings in this part of Romans. Just despise them. If you want to know the truth, I think there are only 15 chapters to Romans, not 16, and that they're like most of 12 should be attached to 11, and the second half of 12 should be attached to 13. I'm going to show you why in a minute, because that chapter heading will throw you off in Romans 13. When you break into Romans 13, but you should not. If I can ask you to do one thing, pretend Romans 13 doesn't exist right now. We're going to just pick up, we're going to read Romans 12, verse 14, and we're going to read through Romans 13, verse 7. So this is verse 14. Bless those who persecute you. Bless and do not curse them. All right? As an individual, right? Somebody slaps you on your cheek, turn to them the other one also. Okay? Rejoice with those who rejoice. Weep with those who weep. Live in harmony with one another. Do not be haughty, but associate with the lowly. Never be wise in your own sight. Repay no one evil for evil, but give thought to what is honorable in the sight of all. And here's, if possible, so far as it depends on you, live peaceably with all. So there's your individual commands, okay? As individuals, this is what you should pursue. In every way, as much as possible, you are to live at peace with everyone. Now, verse 19. Beloved, never avenge yourselves, but leave it to the wrath of God. You see that? Leave it to the wrath of God, verse 19. For it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord. Everybody with me? All right, so there's the quotation, vengeance is mine, I will repay. Paul slaps that right there in Romans 12, though I told you to pretend like it wasn't there. Romans 12, verse 19. And he puts it in the context of your personal vengeance. Do not avenge yourselves. Verse 20. To the contrary, if your enemy is hungry, by the way, we'll probably be back in this passage next week because it just ties in with next week's passage too. To the contrary, if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he is thirsty, give him something to drink. For by so doing, you heap burning coals on his head. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. Then watch where he goes. Let every person be subject to the governing authorities. Now, did Paul just shift gears? He's not shifting gears. He's in the same idea. Watch what he does here. Let every person be subject to the governing authorities. You see what that chapter heading does to you, though? That's the point I want to make. You see that chapter heading, you put it there, and then you go, oh, it's chapter 13. Different subject. No. It's the same subject. Let every person be subject to the governing authorities. For there's no authority except from God, and those that exist have been instituted by God. Therefore, whoever resists the authorities resists what God has appointed. And those who resist will incur judgment. For rulers are not a terror to good conduct, but to bad. Would you have no fear of the one who is in authority? Then do what is good, and you will receive his approval. Now watch, verse 4. For he is God's servant for your good. But if you do wrong, be afraid. He does not bear the sword in vain, for he is the servant of God, an avenger who carries out God's wrath on the wrongdoer. If you go back to verse 12 and you look at verse 19, what's the concept here? What's the context? Verse 19, beloved, never avenge yourselves, but leave it to the wrath of God. Now you flip over to Romans 4, or Romans 13, verse 4, and midway through you have, for he is the servant of God, an avenger who carries out God's wrath on the wrongdoer. Look, Paul basically says there in chapter 12, in a nutshell, pursue mercy. Do good to all. Pursue peace among all. Never return evil for evil. But when he turns to when people do wrong to you, you are to pursue mercy and leave it to the wrath of God, because God is the avenger. Vengeance is his, he will repay. But how does he repay? He repays through the state, through the civil law. I don't know how many people actually realize this now, but that the state is as a divine institution as the church is. Both are ruled by God. Actually, both are to be ruled by the same law. That's one of the things that flies in our face now when we see the government make a law, for instance, like to make abortion legal. We see a government can't make abortion legal. I mean, I know it can on paper, but it cannot make abortion legal. It cannot make abortion moral. because it cannot change morality. And the state is ruled by the exact same thing. And that's why when Isaiah says, woe to those who call good evil and evil good, the application of that is woe when things get perverted like this, when things get turned upside down on their head like this. The individual is to pursue mercy. Always mercy. But the state, it is in their purview to pursue justice. But the Jews have confused these things. And honestly, we have confused them very much ourselves. That's why we live in a culture where people are pursuing justice all the time instead of pursuing mercy all the time. That's why there's so much poison and so much division. We have forgotten the truth of the matter is we, as individuals, are to pursue mercy. If someone slaps you on your right cheek, turn to the other also. If anyone would sue you and take away your tunic, let him have your cloak as well. If anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with him 2 miles. Give to the one who begs from you, and do not refuse one who would borrow from you. That's the thrust of this passage. Do not pursue vengeance as an individual person, but pursue mercy. Do not engage in vengeance as it leads us to commit sin. We are to engage, we are to forgive, we are to forbear, we are to give to others what they do not deserve. That's what he's saying. Look, when they sue you to take your coat, give them your shirt also. Give to them what they don't deserve. When they slap you on the right cheek, turn to them your other also. Give to them what they don't deserve. The process is giving to people what they don't deserve, which is mercy. That is mercy. When you get what you don't deserve, that's mercy. Mercy is never obligatory. It never has an obligation with it. Mercy is always getting what you do not deserve. And that's the command here. That's what we're to do as people, as individuals. We are to pursue mercy. He's not dissolving an Old Testament command here, but rather clarifying its application. The civil magistrate is the servant of God. He bears the sword. He enacts God's vengeance on evildoers. That is not your place. And you should never pursue to do so. Very quickly, let's put some flesh on these bones, okay? Let me give some practical applications. So this is not just like a philosophical lesson. The state and the state's responsibility and yours. Okay. Matthew 38:42 does not apply to a judge while sitting in judgment on a criminal for a crime. There he's the servant of God in vengeance. But if that judge is mugged on the street in his everyday life, he cannot follow the mugger home and kill or incarcerate him for justice's sake. You see the difference? While he's sitting on the judgment bench as a judge enacting his role, he is judging the criminal, and he should be seeking justice. If that criminal has done that law, then he should, or has broken that law, then he should enact the punishment that's appropriate to it. And that's not to say that judges don't have discretion to have mercy, but their overall pursuit in everyday life, in their functioning as a job, in their job, is to be justice. But if he's mugged, he can't follow the guy home and enact vengeance because he's a judge Monday through Friday. If he's mugged on Saturday, it doesn't give him special privileges. All right. Matthew 5:38-42 did not apply to a soldier in the heat of battle in the defense of a just cause. Right? When they were storming trenches in World War I, no matter how we feel about war, people were drafted and they were sent there by somebody else and they were given orders by somebody else. And when an English, French, or American guy made it over to the other trench, it wasn't time to go, slap me on the right cheek, I'm going to turn to you my left one. He was sent there, and it was not murder on his part. In defense of a just cause, he's following a just cause out. Then that's what he's supposed to be doing. He's supposed to be defending. He's supposed to be enacting justice. All right? But when that soldier comes home and he can't find a job, so he decides to take his newfound skills of murder and death and put them out for hire to foreign nations to become a mercenary, there he is a murderer. There he is a murderer. And here's how the principle works out in the church, by the way. 1 Corinthians chapter 6. We did 7 last week. Let's jump back to 6. This is 1 through 8. When one of you has a grievance against another, does he dare go to law before the unrighteous instead of the saints? Or do you not know that the saints will judge the world? And if the world is to be judged by you, are you incompetent to try trivial cases? Do you not know that we are to judge angels? How much more then in matters pertaining to this life? So if you have such cases, why do you lay them before those who have no standing in the church? I say this to your shame. Can it be that there's no one among you wise enough to settle a dispute between brothers, but brother goes to law against brother, and that before unbelievers? To have lawsuits at all with one another is already a defeat for you. Why not rather suffer wrong? Why not rather be defrauded? But you yourselves wrong and defraud even your own brothers. And see, this brings clarity to what it is to live a wise and godly life. But I also want to point out here that the church has the authority to enact its own court. I don't know if you've ever thought about that. The church is a kingdom. That's why it is such an offense when we would sue one another and take it before a foreign court. Because that, even the American court, even though we're all American citizens here, is a foreign court to you and me. If we're believers in Christ, that's a foreign court. That's a court of unbelievers. If there's an issue between us, we should settle it here between us. And we have the authority amongst ourselves, as long as you're a legitimate church, to establish your own court and to establish a fair hearing in a matter, and also to give instructions to your members too. Brother A, you defrauded Brother B for $50,000. You pay Brother B $75,000. Whatever, we could take an Old Testament application law. Maybe he owes 17.7. Whatever that is, but we have that authority in and among ourselves to do such a thing. But you see that mercy holds sway in the ultimate principle, because at the end of it he says that you even take yourselves to the law. It's just a shame to you. Why not suffer? Why not be defrauded? Why not, in other words, why not just mercy? Why not just give them what they don't deserve? Why not just be merciful? This is an offense to you. But this leads us to the question, what does this look like in real life? How do we respond to abortion as Christians? By blowing up the clinics? No, by offering them Jesus Christ as Savior. By praying for them. By showing them mercy. How do we respond to immigration issues as a Christian? Now, you want to talk about some application? Let's make some application. How do we respond to immigration issues as Christians? By personally rounding up illegal aliens? No, by feeding, clothing, and providing for their needs personally, as much as possible, if you know of some that have need. If you're an immigration and customs enforcement officer, your role is different when you are on duty. You there work for the state and you have a job to carry out according to the law. But as a private individual, man, and we have plenty of friends like this, because a lot of them, just practically speaking. Michelle went to a baby shower. Strangest baby shower she ever been to in her whole life. And the Coptic Egyptian baby shower was more like a disco. I didn't get to go. I'm sorry I missed it at this point, but because I didn't get to see the disco baby shower. How did we meet them? This is how we met them. 2012, the Muslim Brotherhood takes over Egypt. And Christians got to get out. It's on fire, and they're killing them in the streets. They bought a one-way ticket to the United States. They got off a plane, and they went directly and applied for asylum. But see, before they could apply for asylum, they had to allow their special visa to run out. The visa allowed them to come here. So they spent a period of time illegal. Most of the time I knew them for the first year to 18 months, they were illegal. What was I supposed to do? What were we supposed to do? Was I supposed to alert the immigrations and customs enforcement officers? What was I supposed to do? They had need. Recently, they had to, and some of you guys I think helped with this. Recently, this family couldn't pay their rent. What were we supposed to do? Were we supposed to let them be put out on the street? Were we supposed to throw them out? No. As individuals, we're to pursue mercy. What happens in a court system happens in a court system. If in 2 years from now, when they go before their immigration court and they send them back to Egypt, there's nothing for me to do. I have no role and responsibility in that. But they're people created in the image of God. I cannot let them starve, nor can I harm them in any way. And by not helping them, it is harming them. Remember, the command of God is exceedingly broad. We are to desire mercy above all else. We are to give mercy as an individual application. But you know what, guys? And I like to always end here, and I know I've went long today. I go long every week. I apologize. This is the gospel. Like this is what we're talking about. This is the gospel. In the original creation, God was our Father. He was always King, but we were related to Him only as children. But it's in the fall we become cosmic criminals. That's what a sinner is. A sinner is a cosmic criminal. We sinned against God. We broke His law. We became cosmic criminals. We sinned against God. God loved us as a father, yet He judged us, yet He was being forced to judge us. He could not pass over our sin. You see, this is the great dilemma created by the fall. Listen to the way God describes Himself in Exodus chapter 34. This is verses 6 and 7 of Exodus 34. Very famous passage. The Lord passed before him. This is Moses hidden in the cleft of the rock, right? And he removes his hand and he goes by Moses. And Moses sees God from behind and he proclaims His name. Listen to God's proclamation of His name. The Lord passed before him and proclaimed, the Lord God, merciful and gracious, slow to anger, abounding in steadfast love and faithfulness, keeping steadfast love for thousands, forgetting iniquity and transgression and sin. Put a line there. Second part. But who by no means can clear the guilty, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children and the children's children to the third and fourth generation. In the first part, in the first half, we get God, and I don't know if this is a precise way of putting this, guys, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to call this God in His private capacity. And what I mean by that, this is God as Father. God as Father, this is what you should hear. The Lord God, merciful and gracious, slow to anger, and abounding in steadfast love and faithfulness, keeping steadfast love for thousands, forgiving iniquity and transgression and sin. That's God. That's your Father. But God, your Father, has a second role. And that second role is what we might call God's public role. And that is His God as judge. But who will by no means clear the guilty, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children and the children's children to the third and fourth generation. Listen, the gospel is God the Father sending God the Son to save us from God Himself. The gospel is God the Father sending God the Son to save us from Himself. That's really what it means to be saved. To be saved is to be saved from the wrath of God. God is merciful. He loves mercy. And He would be merciful to all that come before His throne. Listen, there's a confusing passage, for those of us who love the sovereignty of God. 1 Timothy 2, 3, and 4 probably gets thrown in our face a lot in debates. But this sort of shows God's disposition for us all. So 1 Timothy 2, 3, and 4. This is good, and it is pleasing in the sight of God our Savior, who desires all people to be saved and to come to the knowledge of the truth. We're to be like Him in that. Like I'm supposed to desire to see everyone come to a knowledge of the truth. I don't look over at my Muslim neighbors and desire that they perish. I don't look to the guy in prison who committed the most heinous crime that you could possibly imagine and desire his destruction. Why? Because God takes no pleasure in the death of the wicked Himself. What right would I have to do so? Look, this is the gospel. This is the way it works. God, His disposition is that He loves all. And He desires all to come to a knowledge of the truth. That's the way He thinks about all men. That's His disposition is loving, and we're supposed to be like Him in that. We are to pursue mercy. We are to give to others what they do not deserve. We are to want for others what they do not deserve. We're supposed to desire to see the crooked made straight and the lost found. We're supposed to be warning them about the precarious nature of their life and the awful future that awaits them if they do not turn from their sin and believe on Christ. Pointing to Him as the express image of God's person and personal love for them. God takes no pleasure in the death of the wicked. In the cross, justice and mercy kiss. In the cross, peace and innocence are reestablished. But in the cross, we find our path too. And our path is mercy unto death. It's mercy unto death. I am to pursue mercy unto death. And that's the only actual way we're ever going to remain innocent and pursue peace in this life, is to pursue mercy first. So Jesus, just to wrap up here in Matthew 5, when He says, eye for eye and tooth for tooth, and He goes on and tells us to do these things. Turn your cheek and give your cloak away. Jesus is saying, don't confuse yourself with the state. Because The state has a right role to justice, and the Old Testament law does teach that. But you as an individual are to pursue mercy unto death, and that is the pattern laid out for you. Jesus pursued mercy unto death. And that's what we have pictured in the Lord's table for us. The seal we're now going to prepare to take. Let me invite you just a minute to search your heart. Maybe this question needs to be asked. Is there someone in the body, especially, though I'm supposed to pursue peace with all men as much as possible, but is there somebody in the body particularly maybe that I haven't pursued mercy unto death with? That I've not been merciful with? That when I think of them, I don't want them to get what they don't deserve. I want them to get what they deserve. And if that person is out there, then there's probably work for me to be done personally with that person. Either forgiveness for me to ask, or if there's no forgiveness to be asked because there's been no sin in that way, maybe you just need to commit to pray for that person. And ask God to remove the enmity in your heart between them, especially your brother or sister. We need to pursue peace as much as possible. And we need to pursue mercy unto death. And we cannot allow our own sin nature and our desire for vengeance to cloud that and to take away the innocence that God desires for us to live in, and the peace that God desires for His body, and the mercy that God wants for the world to see among us. By this will all men know that you're my disciples, by the way you love one another. Sometimes love says hard things, and a lot of times, though, love says humble things. And so maybe in some matter somebody needs to be humble about. And maybe that's just for me. Anyway, take a moment, search your heart, and in a moment, Brian is going to lead us in the Nicene Creed, and we're going to take the Lord's table together.